All right, I hope everybody's well. I want to read from the book from Dictatorship to Democracy by Gene Sharp. It's a highly praised book. In the back here, you have BBC News saying Gene Sharp hardly expected in his ninth decade to be mentioned in the same sentence as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. The London Times says, not perhaps since Machiavelli has a book had such an impact in shifting the balance of power between the rulers and the ruled. The Wall Street Journal says Sharp has had broad influence on international events over the past 2 decades, helping to advance a global democratic awakening. The Nation says the world's top scholar of peaceful protests. A little bit on Gene Sharp. He advises governments and resistant movements around the world and is considered the most influential living promoter of nonviolent resistance to autocratic governments. He is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Massachusetts. Dartmouth, was previously at Harvard University's Center of International Affairs, and holds degrees from universities across the planet. A year before his 2009 Nobel Peace Prize nomination, he was the recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award. He currently resides in East Boston. From the front flap of the page of the cover, 21 years ago, at a friend's request, scholar Gene Sharp wrote a blueprint for nonviolent resistance to repressive regimes. It was then translated, photocopied, and handed from one rebel to another, traveling from one country to country across the globe. And these are some of the regimes that were toppled using these methods. From Iran and Venezuela, both countries consider Sharp to be an enemy of the state, to Serbia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, from Tibet, Vietnam, and the former Soviet Union to China and Nepal, and more recently, and notably in Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Libya, and Syria, where the leaders of the Arab Spring view Sharp's ideas as the guiding light of their movement. Sorry, that wasn't regime change in every one of those countries, I don't think. Carrying on here, this short, pithy, and extraordinarily clear guide to overthrowing a dictatorship by nonviolent means lists 198 specific methods, including sit-ins, popular non-obedience, selective strikes, withdrawal of bank deposits, revenue refusal, walkouts, silence, and hunger strikes. Now available for the first time in the United States as a paperback, From Dictatorship to Democracy is the remarkable work that has made the little-known Gene Sharp into, quote, the man who changed the world, end quote. For anyone seeking to understand the political change that is sweeping the globe, and for those seeking to make change at home, here is the essential guide for our times. So what I want to do here ultimately is read from the appendix, where it has 100 and maybe 50 plus methods of nonviolent action. And I want to read some specific passages and go through the table of contents here. And what I want to do is I'm going to change the word dictatorship to either power structure or presidency, to show how this book is not just a blueprint for toppling oppressive regimes. It is a blueprint for a non-hierarchical overthrow of power itself, power structure itself, of hierarchies. So we'll start just here going through the table of contents here. And if you look up this book, it is highly praised. Of course, the author was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And I would assume that a lot of the tools in this book were used to topple oppressive regimes. So it's not exactly a clear, unambiguous little red book. But I'm going to go through here for the table of contents. So the first section, first chapter is facing dictatorships realistically. So facing power structures realistically. Second chapter is the dangers of negotiations. Third chapter is whence comes the power. Fourth chapter is power structures have weaknesses. Fifth chapter is exercising power. Sixth is the need for strategic planning. Seventh is planning strategy. Eighth is applying political defiance. 9 is disintegrating the power structure. 10 is groundwork for durable democracy. And then there's the appendix, which I will read through a list of nonviolent methods of nonviolent action. See if they sound familiar at all. But quickly here in the first chapter, Facing Power Structures Realistically, at the end of this chapter is this passage entitled Facing the Hard Truth, which I'll read here. So facing the hard truth, the conclusion is a hard one. When one wants to bring down a power structure most effectively and with the least cost, then one has 4 immediate tasks. One must strengthen the oppressed population themselves in their determination, self-confidence, and resistance skills. One must strengthen the independent social groups and institutions of the oppressed people. One must create a powerful internal resistance force. One must develop a wise, grand strategic plan for liberation and implement it skillfully. A liberation struggle is a time for self-reliance and internal strengthening of the struggle group. As Charles Stewart Parnell called out during the Irish rent strike campaign in 1879, quote, "It is no use relying on the government. You must only rely upon your own determination. Help yourselves by standing together. Strengthen those amongst yourselves who are weak. Band yourselves together, organize yourselves, and you must win. When you have made this question ripe for settlement, then and not till then will it be settled." End quote. Against a strong, self-reliant force, given wise strategy, disciplined and courageous action, and genuine strength, the power structure will eventually crumble. Minimally, however, the above 4 requirements must be fulfilled. As the above discussion indicates, liberation from power structures ultimately depends on the people's ability to liberate themselves. The case of successful political defiance or nonviolent struggle for political ends, cited above, indicated that the means do exist for populations to free themselves, but that option has remained undeveloped. We will examine this option in detail in the following chapters. However, we should first look at the issue of negotiations as a means of dismantling power structures. The next chapter is entitled The Dangers of Negotiations. A little bit from the chapter, Merits and Limitations of Negotiations. Negotiations are a very useful tool in resolving certain types of issues in conflicts and should not be neglected or rejected when they are appropriate. In some situations where no fundamental issues are at stake and therefore a compromise is acceptable, negotiations can be an important means to settle conflict. A labor strike for higher wages is a good example of the appropriate role of negotiations in a conflict. Negotiated settlement may provide an increase somewhere between the sums originally proposed by each of the contending sides. Labor conflicts with legal trade unions are, however, quite different than the conflicts in which the continued existence of the cruel power structure or the establishment of political freedom are at stake. When the issues at stake are fundamental, affecting religious principles, issues of human freedom, or the whole future development of the society, negotiations do not provide a way of reaching a mutually satisfactory solution. On some basic issues, there should be no compromise. Only a shift in power relations in favor of the Democrats can adequately safeguard the basic issues at stake. Such a shift will occur through struggle, not negotiations. This is not to say that negotiations ought never be used. The point here is that negotiations are not a realistic way to remove a strong power structure in the absence of a powerful democratic opposition. Negotiations, of course, may not be an option at all. Firmly entrenched political leaders who feel secure in their position may refuse to negotiate with their democratic opponents. Or when negotiations have been initiated, the democratic negotiators may disappear and never be heard of again. I'm going to skip a little here to the chapter of where it says power structures have weaknesses. Remember, it says dictatorships have weaknesses, but I'm just changing the language to see how this can be a kind of universal blueprint for political overthrow, maybe. So, weaknesses of dictatorships. Weaknesses of power structures. Among the weaknesses of power structures are the following. The cooperation of a multitude of people, groups, and institutions needed to operate the system may be restricted or withdrawn. The requirements and effects of the regime's past policies will somewhat limit its present ability to adopt and implement conflicting policies. The system may become routine in its operation, less able to adjust quickly to new situations. Personnel and resources already allocated for existing tasks will not be easily available for new needs. Subordinates fearful of displeasing their superiors may not report accurate or complete information needed by those in power to make decisions. The ideology may erode, and myths and symbols of the system may become unstable. If a strong ideology is present that influences one's view of reality, firm adherence to it may cause inattention to actual conditions and needs. Deteriorating efficiency and competency of the bureaucracy or excessive controls and regulations may make the system's policies and operations ineffective. Internal institutional conflicts and personal rivalries and hostilities may harm and even disrupt the operation of the power structure. Intellectuals and students may become restless in response to conditions, restrictions, doctrinalism, and repression. The general public may over time become apathetic, skeptical, and even hostile to those in power. Regional class, cultural, and national differences may become acute. The power hierarchy of the leadership is always unstable to some degree, and at times extremely so. Individuals do not only remain in the same position in the ranking, but may rise or fall to other ranks or be removed entirely and replaced by new persons. Sections of the police or military forces may act to achieve their own objectives, even against the will of the established power structure, including by coup d'etat. If the dictatorship is new, it is time required for it to become well established. With so many decisions made by so few people in the power structure, mistakes of judgment, policy, and actions are likely to occur. If the regime seeks to avoid these dangers and decentralizes controls and decision-making, its control over the central levers of power may be further ended. All right, there's a lot more I could read through, but I'm just going to go to the appendix and just read through this list of the methods of nonviolent action. So they're broken down by sections. So the first section is the methods of nonviolent protest and persuasion. Public speeches, letters of opposition or support, declarations by organizations and institutions, signed public statements, open letters, declarations of indictment and intention, group or mass petitions. Next section is communications with the wider audience. Slogans, caricatures, and symbols, banners, posters, and displayed communications, leaflets, pamphlets, and books, newspapers and journals, records, radio and television, skywriting, and earthwriting. Group representations, deputations, mock awards, group lobbying, picketing, mock elections. Symbolic public acts, displaying of flags and symbolic colors, wearing of symbols, prayer and worship, delivering symbolic objects, protest disrobings, destruction of own property, symbolic lights, displays of portraits, paint as protest, new signs and names, symbolic sounds, symbolic reclamations, rude gestures, pressures on individuals, haunting officials, taunting officials, fraternization, vigils, drama and music, humorous skits and pranks, performance of plays and music, singing, processions. So marches, parades, religious processions, pilgrimages, motorcades, honoring the dead, political mourning, mock funerals, demonstrative funerals, homage at burial place, public assemblies, assemblies of protest or support, protest meetings, camouflaged meetings of protest, teach-ins, withdrawal and renunciation, walkouts, silence, renouncing honors, turning one's back. Next section is the methods of social non-cooperation. So this first subsection is ostracism of persons, social boycott, selective social boycott, excommunication, interdict. Next section, non-cooperation with social events, customs, and institutions. Suspension of social and sports activities, boycott of social affairs, student strike, social disobedience, withdrawal from social institutions. Next section is withdrawal from the social system. So stay at home, total personal non-cooperation, flight of workers, sanctuary, collective disappearance, protest, immigration. Next section is the methods of economic non-cooperation. Action by consumers. Consumers boycott, non-consumption of boycotted goods, policy of austerity, rent withholding, refusal to rent, national consumers boycott, international consumers boycott. Actions by workers and producers. Workmen's boycott, producers boycott. Actions by middlemen, suppliers and handlers boycott. Traders boycott, refusal to let or sell property, lockout, refusal of industrial assistance. Actions by holders of financial resources. Withdrawal of bank deposits, refusal to pay fees, dues, and assessments, refusal to pay debts or interests, severance of funds and credit, revenue refusal, refusal of a government's money. Actions by governments. Domestic embargo, blacklisting of traders, international sellers embargo, international buyers embargo, international trade embargo. Next section is the methods of economic non-cooperation. So, protest strikes, quickie walkout, lightning strike, agricultural strikes, peasant strikes, farm worker strike, strikes by special groups, refusal of impressed labor, prisoner strike, craft strike, professional strike, restricted strikes. So detailed strike, bumper strike, slowdown strike, strike by resignation, limited strike, selective strike, a lot of strikes here. The methods of political non-cooperation. Withholding or withdrawal of allegiance, refusal of public support, literature and speeches advocating resistance, boycott of legislative bodies, boycott of elections, boycott of government employment and positions, boycott of government departments, agencies, and other bodies, withdrawal from government educational institutions, boycott of government-supported organizations, refusal of assistance to enforcement agents, removal of own signs and place marks, refusal to accept appointed officials, refusal to dissolve existing institutions. Citizens' alternatives to obedience. So reluctant and slow compliance. Non-obedience in absence of direct supervision. Popular non-obedience, disguised disobedience. Refusal of an assemblage or meeting to disperse. Sit down. Non-cooperation with conscription and deportation. Hiding, escape, and false identities. Civil disobedience of illegitimate laws. Actions by government personnel. Selective refusal of assistance by government, aids, blocking of lines of command and information, stalling and obstruction, general administrative non-cooperation, judicial non-cooperation, mutiny, domestic governmental action, quasi-legal evasions and delays, non-cooperation by constituent governmental units, changes in diplomatic and other representation, delay and cancellation of diplomatic events, refusal of membership in international bodies, and so forth. The methods of nonviolent intervention. Here we go. Self-exposure to the elements, psychological interventions. The fast of moral pressure, hunger strikes, reverse trial, nonviolent harassment. Physical interventions, sit in, stand in, ride in, wade in, mill in, pray in, nonviolent raids, nonviolent air raids, nonviolent invasion, nonviolent interjection, nonviolent obstruction, nonviolent occupation. Social intervention. Establishing new social patterns, overloading the facilities, stall in, speak in, guerrilla theater, alternative social institutions, alternative social narratives, alternative communication systems. Economic intervention. A reverse strike, stay in strike, nonviolent land seizure, defiance of blockades, politically motivated counterfeiting, preclusive purchasing, seizure of assets, dumping, selective patronage, alternative markets, alternative transportation systems, alternative economic institutions. And the last ones here for political intervention, overloading of administrative systems, disclosing identities of secret agents, seeking imprisonment, civil disobedience of neutral laws, work on without collaboration, and dual sovereignty and parallel government. So go ahead and pick up the book. It's a very thin book. It's an interesting read, and I think it elucidates some of the goings-ons that we are encountering right now. I am not for or against this book. I'm just actually interested in its content and its history and its potential use in different ways. So let me know what you think. Thanks for listening.